Peace, love, and light to all American Aborigines. It's your brother Original Power. We got my big brother Truth in the building with me today. Hey, y'all already know what it is, man. Untold Truth. Transatlantic Slave Trade Part 1. Make sure y'all hit that like button. Make sure y'all support the channel as we pop off in. Make sure y'all hit the like button and all that good stuff. Let's go.
I said, paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was scared of paper. Baby, it's alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. I said, paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Baby, it's alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. I said, y'all never die, never left us. Even though they take you home, you still behind you like a catcher. Life is like a doctor, everybody wants their checkup. Money, he can preach a charge for a confession. See, ain't nobody focused on the bullshit that they told us. I was trying to for us. We the best part of waking up before the folders. That's why they want your backs against the wall like a poster. Indoctrination being sold as education. Most of history they taught you came with some imagination. Roots was never true. Fuck the whole compilation. Fuck Walter Plecker. Fuck Alex Haley. America is Egypt. Israel Queen Khalifa. Babylon used to dabble. Why I check my fever. Niggas think I'm lying cause they sleep. But bitch, I ain't no fool shopping my toes every season. I said paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Buried us alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. I said paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Buried us alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. Guess I gotta start bad rapper, tell these niggas how it happened. Control is the goal, now you space like William Shatner. Technology's economy has overthrown your balance. Now your headaches come from waves, Microsoft up in your atmosphere. Fears how they take you, they expect you for being active and questioning all the requisites made to prevent disasters. Clearing out the Turkish dreamer, talking to the past. They got the old line tied to this survival for the masses. They never loved our classics, but bite off our originals. Classify your favorite rhymes the way they did the Seminoles. I'm so black pride that my inside's purple. If the brother never died, they probably never alert you. You need to venture out and stop sticking in circles. Streets and numbers react different to curfews. The movement not perfume, the streets ain't gold. Our summer so cold, we left to follow froze. I said paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Buried us alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. I said paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Buried us alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. I said paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Buried us alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us. I said paper on paper on paper. Ain't no genocide, we was killed on paper. Buried us alive in the proudest of the paper. They know what who we are, so they hate us cause they hate us.
Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Make sure y'all tap in. Got another fire build, a classic build. So make sure y'all tap in, man. This is gonna be one of them ones. Hopefully it don't get blocked off of the internet. So make sure y'all do y'all due diligence by hitting the like button and sharing this on all your social media outlets.
Yeah, I'm so dope, my heart was low. When you move like that, the time is slow. I can't get the blacks and John Jones crack open the land chance like go in the town. What's a nigga to a hater? Eat $5 though, he not ever made it. Tell places that you waiting on the table. Till they bring it up, he takes it back on vacation. I said, if I praise the team for how God feeling. He say put them up before him in the line image. The shooter got the Christian. I got a vision for niggas that got listen so they don't. We came from the soil, wasn't fucking with no ghosts. Bible took our spirit and we started on our own. Bible family criminals, don't look like I don't know. But fuck them in their britches. We was something for the nothing. Now we got this type of something. reincarnation of angel, fresh up out the Mr. Batman, Mr. Batman, Mr. Batman, Mr. Batman. Shooters on my roof, lawyers in the court, we can never die. Bitch, we bulletproof. This message to the Batman. This message to the
Hey, you were the
Batman.
slaves, you was prisoners of war.
It's like wasting your time, these other bitches ain't important. You ain't meditating, you ain't hitting with the source. Like what the fuck's a little, you ain't painted with the source. I find it hard to trust the pastor who read the silence, the master who preaching we should submit while getting murdered and captured about how we should wait on God. It's never our vernacular. They get paid and prayed by the dollar long as they're keeping us stagnant. And niggas think they woke, huh? Like you can change a whole world through a boat, huh? Like slave masters willing to let they slave go, huh? That slave master was probably your kinfolk, huh? History in reverse. A black king strategy. When blacks were your majesty, they always had your pyramids, the point to where the castles be. Aristocracies with your last name patent accurately. Yeah. And I ain't even tell half the shit. I ain't even tell a quarter of the shit. I'm just getting started. Y'all niggas rap about I'm busting guns and all this weird shit. I'm trying to get my people back, nigga.
Peace, peace, peace. Can y'all please drop some fire emojis in the chats if y'all can hear me loud and clear? Drop ones if I'm super clear. If I'm choppy, just let me know. Let's continue this out so we can get straight into this build, you guys.
You always got something to say. Like you don't shut up. A lot of niggas died 1865. The mother fell high, man, don't let it ride. Everybody was living on your side.
You sleep at night.
They put that white man on. Got you begging him for acting like that white man on. Had you swearing you was acting, that's that white man on. Had you proud to be a savage, that's that white man song. And lying on your shit, this my definition. Being savage was our license, you be on the dick. We can put your ass down when we was in the kitchen. And then you start to live by the right type business. White supremacy fake. Homie, why that shit matters if you do what they say. We the guys of the game, so when they say they pick God, now you know what they make. Shoe song, move song, shoe song, move song. Put us in the same room, he gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that broom, he gon' go down. Shoe song, move song, shoe song, move song. Put us in the same room, he gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that broom, he gon' go down. Every day my niggas dying, they don't know the truth. How the hell you close to God, we don't know it's you. Yo, how the hell you close to vibe, we don't know the shoot. He should have died, you let him slide, cause he look just like you. I try to tell him my skin ain't kin. Everybody ain't your partner, everybody ain't your friend. How the hell they supposed to help when they the ones that put you in? They don't struggle how we struggle, they can't get it how we live. Can't be scared to die when we already dead. Even for your life is sake, no matter how you play it. My higher self said we should choose remain godly. My lower want these motherfucking bodies. If a church they circles like a motherfucking eye. Take them to the stack and put them down like Hoshi Bobby. They don't want equality in this kill, they want these problems. Killers right beside me, stand full of chicken models. Shoes song, move song, shoe song, move song. Put us in the same room, he gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that broom, he gon' go down. Shoe song, move song, shoe song, move song. Put us in the same room, he gon' go down. Hit a nigga with that broom, he gon' go down.
Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Hopefully, I'm not choppy anymore. I'll try to fix the audio. Let me go make sure we're good on the audio. Got the brother of Truth in the building with us. Shout out to my brother Truth. Shout out to my brother Truth.
Man, what's good? What's good? Shout out to the chat, man. Shout out to my bro, man. We ready to get it in, man. They took us down, so we gonna bring it back up. You feel me?
Right. Let's get a mic check, man. Can you hear the brother Truth loud and clear? Can you hear me loud and clear, man? Let's get it, man. We don't need no introduction, man. So yeah, the last one was cut off, man. So we said Once we got a computer, thanks to you guys, we got a computer. Shout out to the family out there, man. We raised enough money to go get a computer, and we got a nice one too. We got a real nice one. Uh, so we ready to go today, man. So let's get it in. Peace of love to everybody in the chat. Brother Truth, you got something to say? A little introduction before we get into it.
Nah, bro, I ain't even gonna lie, man. I'm just ready to get into it, man. You know, hit the like button, hit the share button, man. Let's get the family up in the building, man. We about to get ready to rock this motherfucker out, man. Set the whole stage on fire.
Let's go, let's go, let's go, man. Let's start this audio off nice, man.
They
Let's
came
go.
as slaves, vast human cargo, transported on tall British ships, bound for the Americas. They were shipped by the hundreds of thousands and included men, women, and even the youngest of children. Whenever they rebelled or even disobeyed an order, they were punished in the harshest of ways. Slave owners would hang their human property by their hands and set their hands or feet on fire as one form of punishment. They were burned alive and had their heads placed on pikes in the marketplaces as warnings to other captives. Now, do we really need to go into all the gory details? We know all too well of the atrocities of the African slave trade. But are we talking about the African slave trade? King James II and Charles I also led a continued effort to enslave the Irish. Britain's famed Oliver Cromwell furthered this practice of dehumanizing one's next door neighbor. The Irish slave trade began when James II sold 30,000 Irish prisoners as slaves to the New World. His proclamation of 1625 required Irish political prisoners to be sent overseas and sold to English settlers in the West Indies. By the mid-1600s, the Irish were the main slaves sold to Antigua and Montserrat. At that time, 70% of the total population of Montserrat were Irish slaves. Ireland quickly became the biggest source of human livestock for English merchants. The majority of the early slaves to the New World were actually white, something many people aren't taught in their school. From 1641 to 1652, over 500,000 Irish were killed by the English, and another 300,000 were sold as slaves. Ireland's population fell from about 1.5 million to 600,000 just in one single decade. Families were ripped apart as the British did not allow Irish fathers to take their wives or children with them across the Atlantic. This led to a helpless population of homeless women and children. Britain's solution was to auction them off as well. During the 1650s, over 100,000 Irish children between the ages of 10 and 14 were taken from their parents and sold as slaves in the West Indies, Virginia, and New England. In this decade, 52,000 Irish, mostly women and children, were sold to Barbados and Virginia. Another 30,000 Irish men and women were also transported and sold to the highest bidder. In 1656, Cromwell ordered that 2,000 Irish children be taken to Jamaica and sold as slaves to English settlers. Many people today will avoid calling the Irish slaves what they truly were, slaves. They'll come up with terms like indentured servants. This is to describe what occurred to the Irish. However, in most cases, from the 17th and 18th centuries, Irish slaves were nothing more than human cattle. As an example, the African slave trade was just beginning during the same period. It is well recorded that African slaves, not tainted
with the stain of the hated Catholic theology and more expensive to purchase, were often treated far better than their Irish counterparts. African slaves were very expensive during the late 1600s, as they were 50 sterling. Irish slaves came cheap, no more than 5 sterling. If a planter whipped or branded or beat an Irish slave to death, it was never a crime. A death was nothing more than a monetary setback, but far cheaper than killing a more expensive African. The English masters quickly began breeding the Irish women for both their own personal pleasure and for greater profit. Children of slaves were themselves also slaves, which increased the size of the master's free workforce. Even if an Irish woman somehow obtained her freedom, her kids would remain slaves of her master. This means Irish moms, even with this newfound emancipation, would seldom abandon their kids and would remain in servitude. In time, the English thought of a better way to use these women, in many cases girls as young as 12, to increase their market shares. The settlers began to breed Irish women and girls with African men to produce slaves with a distinct complexion. These new mulatto slaves brought a higher price than Irish livestock, and likewise enabled the settlers to save money rather than purchase new African slaves. This practice of interbreeding Irish females with African men went on for several decades and was so widespread that in 1681, legislation was passed forbidding the practice of mating Irish slave women to African slave men for the purposes of producing slaves for sale. In short, it was only stopped because it interfered with the profits of large slave transport companies. England continued to ship tens of thousands of Irish slaves for more than a century. Records state that after 1798, the Irish Rebellion, thousands of Irish slaves were sold to both America and Australia. There were horrible abuses from both African and Irish captives. One British ship even dumped 1,302 slaves into the Atlantic Ocean so that the crew could have plenty of food to eat. There's little question that the Irish experienced the horrors of slavery as much, if not more, in the 17th century as the Africans did. There is also very little question that those brown tan faces you witness in your travels to the West Indies are very likely a combination of Irish and African ancestry. In 1839, Britain finally decided on its own to end its participation in Satan's highway to hell and stop the transporting of slaves. While their decision did not stop pirates from doing what they desired, the new law slowly concluded this chapter of nightmarish Irish misery. But if anyone, black or white, believes that slavery was only an African experience, then they have it completely wrong. Irish slavery is a subject worth remembering, not erasing from our memories. But where are our public and private schools? Where are the history books? Why is it so seldomly discussed? Do the memories of hundreds of thousands of Irish victims merit more than a mention from an unknown writer? Or is their story to be one that their English pirates intended? Unlike the African book, have the Irish story utterly and completely disappeared as if it never existed. None of the Irish victims ever made it back to their homeland to describe their ordeal. These are the lost slaves, the ones that time and biased history books conveniently forgot.
All right, so he put his little sad side story on it. Where he gonna probably been Irish or white Irish, but we gonna get into this. So let's get into white slavery, man. That was the introduction. Shout out to everybody in here. Hopefully y'all can see and hear everything loud and clear. Let's get right into it.
Hey man, drop some fire emojis for bro, man. We about to get up in this shit, y'all. Come on, man. And please
Yeah.
screen record for us, please.
All right. All right. So let's get into it. This is from the book White Cargo. This is from White Cargo. So let's get into some of the early conversations that they're reading up in this White Cargo. All right, make sure y'all can drop some fire emojis if y'all can hear me loud and clear. So this is notes, selected bibliography, index, introduction, in the shadow of the myth. All right, it says slavery. They can have everywhere. It is a weed that grows in every soil. That's by Edmund Burke. Right? That the man who is property of another man is mere chattel, though he continue a man, a straddle, a trustees and on a government. That's where that particular quote is from. Let's get into it. In the summer of 2003, archaeologists excavated a 17th century a site outside of Indianapolis, Maryland, and discovered the skeleton of a teenage boy. Under examination, showed the boy had have died sometime in the 1600s. He was about 16 years old and had tuberculosis. His skull showed evidence of fearful mouth infection and a horrendous disc. I mean, her her what the fuck did it say? Her herniated disc and the other injuries is to the back were synonymous with years of slavery and toil, which toil means slavery, of hard toil. Right? Let's get into the rest of it. Youth. Let me highlight the section that I'm reading. All right. The youth was neither African nor Native American. He was nor he was Northern European, probably English. His remains were found in what had to be the cellar of a 17th century house, in a old hole under a pile of household waste. It was as if the boy was just literally not accounted for. Then died. Then after his death, he was thrown out with the rubbish. Forensic anthropologists believe that the young youth was probably an indentured servant. The deceptively mild label commonly used to describe hundreds of thousands of men and women and children shipped from Britain. Okay, it said hundreds of thousands, but we're gonna get into the millions. To the Americas and to the Caribbeans in the year in the about 150 years before the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Most of these servants paid their passage to the America by selling their rights to their labor for the numbers of years. Others of these forcefully excelled in the soil of colonies as servants for up to 14 years. Many were effectively enslaved. Okay, that's just dealing with the Americas. So it shows you early Europeans was getting shipped all throughout London, and when it says to the Americas, yeah, it might get into the hundreds of thousands when it deals with America, or tens of thousands, but it was millions of European English slaves, white English slaves that were shipped out throughout the motherfucking world. So let's get into a little more. Let's get into a little more. Okay, my bad. Apologize. All right. Well, just this is going to coincide with the video that we just read as well. So let's get up in that. All righty, y'all.
Hey, big bro, before you go on, hey, you should back out and make the screen bigger for them, bro, so they can be able to see it a little bit better. Not from that area, but from because it got our icons to the side. Take us out the side of it and just leave the screen straight up there. You have to do that in the screen, y'all.
Is that better?
Yup, for shit.
Is that better for you guys? Hopefully, y'all can see. All right, let's get into it. This book tells the story of these victims of empire. They were all supposed to gain their freedom eventually. For many, it didn't work out that way. In these earlier decades, half of them died in bondage. This book tracks the evolution of the system in which tens of thousands of whites were held as chattel, market like slavery, punished brutally, and in some cases, literally worked to death. All right, and it literally worked to death. For decades, these unclassed were treated just as savagely as the blacks in the indeed toil, which is slavery, suffered and rebelled alongside them. Eventually, a racial wedge was thrust between white and black, leaving blacks officially enslaved and whites apparently upgraded, but in the reality, just as enslaved as they were both. I mean, just as well as they were slaves before. According to contemporaries, some whites were treated with less humanity than blacks working alongside them. Okay, so this is all from the book White Cargo, and what is simply giving you a vivid description is that these people were slaves. These people, white people, was enslaved. They suffered brutal shit, brutal turmoil, and even in most cases, when black, notice that they didn't say African, notice that they said black because black is a term of status under servitude. It's a you know under being POW, color of law. Uh, but we get into that. So when they tell you that these blacks was treated uh a little better and most times a lot better, even though they was working side by side accordingly, as servants, the whites was treated bad, you know. Let's get into it. Amongst the first to be sent to were the children. Some were dispatched by impoverished parents seeking a better life for them, but others forcefully deported. In 1618, listen, this is when the same time they gave you this African slave trade. In 1618, the authorities of London began to sweep up hundreds of troublesome orchards from the slums, ignoring protests from the children and their families, shipped them to Virginia. Oh my God. So in 1618, they took children from England and Europe and shipped them to Virginia. And in 1619, where did they tell you people went to in America? Virginia. This is the same story. It would have took probably a year for the voyage that took place. So by the time they made it, it would have been 1619. So this is that story that you heard. Okay. So they took these people from 1618 into Virginia. English richest man was behind the mass explosion. It was presented as an act of charity, but the starving children were to be given a new start in parentage in America. And in fact, they were sold as planters to work in the fields, and half of them were dead within a year. Shipments of children continued from England into then from Ireland for decades. Many of these migrants were a little more than toddlers. In 1661, the wife of a man who imported 4 Irish boys into Maryland as servants wondered why her husband had not brought some cradles to have rocked them in in as they were so little. So listen, man, they was just sneaking off and selling their kids a little money. From 1618 all the way up to 1661, English kids was just becoming missing and popping up all in America. That's how you see these orphan kids. That's when you start seeing these melanated men and women with these little white kids, or a black woman with a titty in the mouth, feeding these
Sally
toddlers,
Miller.
younger than toddlers, children.
Sally
Say
Miller.
what?
I said Sally
Sally
Miller.
Miller and
That's
shit.
all. That's all I'm gonna say.
Right. That's a fact. So I'm gonna pause right there, and I'm gonna let you get right into it. We're gonna switch it back and forth. We're gonna rock it out. So that just explains to you that this whole narrative of the African slave trade or this transatlantic slave trade, we never said it happened in 1618. These were white people that they brought from England, Europe, and other places like Ireland into Virginia around 1619, 1618, as early as 1618. Document. So go ahead, brother. True.
Big facts, big facts. So due to so where we at with this right here, I'm gonna piggyback and bounce off, bro, with damn, what I'm trying to see. What I'm trying to see. I'm gonna bounce out with this one right here to show how extensive these Europeans was being enslaved. Because we gotta understand they were a global commodity at this time, as far as slaves being commodities. So let's
Right.
so let
Alistair Oliver Cromwell thought that these people would be the brilliant slaves. You know what I'm saying? Like these suffering neighbors of mine would be perfect to make some money off of. And he literally did this shit.
on God, big facts. He literally did that shit. So let me see before I share my screen which one of these motherfuckers I'm gonna get into. All right. All right. I know where I'm gonna go with this now. So we're gonna go to another aspect of uh other locations of where they was being bounced to as well. And I'm gonna go right into right to their border and show how
Hey, brother,
extensive
not
this
a
shit.
coincidence. We're not talking about the slave trade started in 1619. We just talking about the first slaves came over to America around 16 in the 1600s, early as 1500s, white slaves. And not only that, this ordeal was simultaneously going on for hundreds of years on the other side of the continent, on the other side of the globe, on the eastern continent.
And we not bugging, bro. You painting perspective and ain't even heard the whole narrative where we going. So we're dealing
Oh
with this
yeah,
experience because our people are stuck on being in slave boats being shipped across the Atlantic. So right now we're going to show you what was going on across the Atlantic. But if you want to deal with the Hispanics and shit, the Spaniards and
that's
in their
another
time,
deal.
that's another bill. As a matter of fact, you can go to my channel, nigga. I got multiple sources about that. We're basically just trying to show you motherfuckers there was too much documented evidence going on in the world in order for this whole slave shit to start. But let's see what
Let's
else
get
these
it. He gonna learn today. So let's get it.
yeah, we ain't finna be motherfucking dealing with niggas in the chat, man. Hey, yeah, I'm ready. Go and share my screen for me, bro. There we go. There we go. There we go. Let me blow this up. Let me blow this up. All right, so we can get it in. All right. Christian slaves, Muslim masters, white slavery in the Mediterranean, Barbary coast, in Italy, 1500s to 1800s. Now, you know why this term Italy is so fucking important? Because that's the Catholic Church is supposed to be behind all this shit, right? And this is they motherfucking capital. So, man, let's get into it, man. Man, I ain't finna keep dealing with no motherfucking. Uh,
Make sure y'all hit that like button out there. Make sure y'all hit the like button. Support the channel, y'all. Appreciate y'all for tapping in.
this shit, fuck it. Let me just do it like this. Bam, bam, bam. Maybe if I smallen it down a little bit, it'll work. Fuck me. Okay, that's what's up. All right. So you see the photo. You see what's going on. And we're going to get right into the proceedings. Now, as we go along the way, right, to get right down into the brief introduction of this shit, one thing you will notice is that they list all their sources of where they're getting this information from, the figures they use. You feel me? Currency and giving you years with the shit. You know, we're gonna deal with shit that actually got fucking actual fucking evidence to it. Some exemplary prices. You feel me? Also, slave taking activity between the 1516, since my man said the Hispaniola in the 1500s, from 1516 to 1798. Look, Spanish capture of Oran frees 15,000 Christian slaves. 15,000 Christian slaves, more than 100 villagers, many hundreds, 130, 300, 6,000, Port of Mahone, 7,000 slaves. Like, come on, man. What the fuck is that? Where's the documented evidence that's backing up these sources that bringing y'all this fucking fruititious, this fruitless bullshit? The actual motherfucking correspondence of slaves. Like, come on, man. Where these sources at? More than 10,000, 2,000 Greeks, almost all slaves, 28 Christianias, more than 20,000 Christians, 1701. Come on, man. A lot of these records and shit, what you seeing when it being written like this, where that shit at? When you seeing that shit written like this, not more than 3,000 Christians, those are the friars writing back to motherfucking to these places in Europe to let them know how many of their people they got down in that bitch. Slave counts for Tunisia and Trilopia. 1535, 22,000 slaves. Come on, man. All right, man. Let me stop being stuck in that part right there, man. Let me just get right to it, man. Let me see. Here go the introduction. Yeah, that's what we was going at. All right. This is a correspondent from Pedro Biago di Torino in 1670. You feel me? In 20 years of wearisome work as a missionary in Aleppo, Baghdad, Grand Cairo, and Suez on the Red Sea, I have seen the infinite misery of the poor Christians oppressed by the barbarian cruelty of the Mohammedans. 1670s. This book has come out of my desire to rethink the story of European enslavement in the early modern Mediterranean world, to place as much as possible this always rather neglect, even deride, form of slavery in the larger context of slave studies worldwide. I have been particularly interested in casting white slavery in the Maghreb in the terms that have been developed by historians, sociologists, to cope with the much vaster political fraught topic of transatlantic slavery. Fraught topic. The bondage of Black Africans to white Europeans or Americans that have become, for many scholars, the archetype and model of all slave studies. In part, I chose to do so because the topic and approaches that have grown up around American slavery provide such fertile conceptual grounds for applications to the Barbary Coast, where slavery is hardly unknown, but still strangely neglected field in intellectual terms. In the course of my studies of the so-called Barbary regencies and of the Italians who were caught up in the Islamic slavery practice there, I was also increasingly impressed by other reasons that make these two arenas of bondage: Black Americans and white Africans. Black Americans, white Africans. All right. And especially appropriate intellectual and historical pairing. I have been struck that slavery, both in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, arose and flourished in such terms at almost exactly the same time. Now, this one I'm going to pause at, and I'm going to blow this shit the fuck up so y'all can get this shit right in y'all face. Come on, man. That shit be bugging, man. All right. Hold on. No, that ain't the part. All I should have got a MacBook, my G. Here we go right here. Let's highlight this. All right. I have been struck that slavery, both in the Mediterranean and across the Atlantic, arose and flourished, and such a term can be used at almost exactly the same time. One might even say for the same reason. You feel me? Now let's stay right there, right? Because it say that it arose at almost exactly the same time and almost for the same reason. Now, as bro was just going over when he was talking about the Europeans being bought up over here, especially with them children, he also broke down to you in that information the reason why they chose these people over the so-called Africans and all that shit, right? And this is telling you that right in the Mediterranean, right across the Mediterranean, the same shit was going on at exactly the same time and for the same fucking reasons. You feel me? But I'm even show you how far back that shit go in my next segment and shit, man. Let me come on, man. There we go. Let me just keep going. Of course, slavery has been practiced since the earliest history, earliest histories in both places. Its roots go deep into both the classical cultures of Egypt, Greece, Rome, as well as the Amerindian empires in Mexico and Central America. Yet it was only at the beginning of the modern age that slavery is in each of these regions took a leap into quality and quantity until both became institutions of large scale and high efficiency. The cause, at least in part, can be traced to the events of 1492. In August of that year, Christopher Columbus set sail to find the New World for Europe. But I thought he was going to find India for Europe. You feel me? I thought he was going to find India for Europe. He's going to find the New World. And in doing so, putting in motion all the mechanism of conquest and extractive exploitation that would eventually give rise to the sprawling system of plantation slavery in both American continents. Less than 2 months earlier, however, the final Spanish conquest of Grenada had also set the stage for what would be the mirror image of this American institution. By expelling the Moors from southern Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella created an implacable enemy for their resurgent kingdom. Now they created an enemy by doing that. On that, I mean, let me back up. Ferdinand and Isabella created an implacable enemy for their resurgent kingdom, one that would find a new home very nearby in Morocco, Algeria, and eventually along the entire Maghreb. Now, don't they be telling y'all that y'all ancestry DNA come back to the Maghreb? But they telling you that these motherfuckers is down there snatching up slaves. They was too scared, baby. They went down in no fucking Maghreb. Let's stop playing. The newly reinvigorated Islamic societies they helped to create their soon set out consciously and passionately to square accounts with Christendom, basically to settle the fucking score. Building galleys, attacking Europe merchant ships, raiding coastal communities, and taking slaves. So these motherfuckers was down in the very place they say they was the very place that they say that they was at snatching niggas was the very people setting scores, not only attacking their merchant ships. So how the fuck was they getting down to the Gold Coast? But also motherfucking they was raiding all of their coastal communities. So how the fuck was you leaving out? And how was you leaving out that fucking fast? This is the simple version, of course. Other forces has to be factored in to explain fully the strength, extent, and sheer tenacity of this pernicious institution in either arena. Yet, even in such simpler terms, one element does stand out. Slavery in America is different at its inception from that in the Maghreb by being above all matter of business as opposed to passion. Black slaves were hauled to America to wire and profit from lands that could not be otherwise exploited, at least not from the cash crop that markets in Lisbon, London, and Amsterdam clamor to buy. All right. Okay, bro. Know what? I'm not gonna deal with this. Let me just keep reading. Use use your brain and use your common sense, nigga. If they saying that the documents is showing motherfucking that they being put in slaves, and on top of that they fucking
don't play it.
Like,
Don't play into
yeah,
it. Let's
bro.
get it out. He
Yeah,
gonna get it. They get it.
Yeah, let's get it. I see common sense is not that fucking common nowadays. The slave traffickers and plantation owners may have experienced contempt, pity, and disgust for their human chattel, but they bought and sold them primarily for work it did to look down on oxen and horses. Such a failure of basic humanities is still felt centuries later in all the nations that were caught up in this shameful spiral. The more so because it was a misery fueled by greed more than ideology or cause. In Barbary, those who hunted and traded slaves certainly hoped to make a profit, but in their traffic in Christians, there was always an element of revenge, almost jihad, for the wrongs of 1492. For the centuries of crusading violence that had preceded them, and for the ongoing religious struggle between Christians and Muslims that have continued to roll the Mediterranean world well into modern times. So let's stop here, right? Let's stop here, right? Okay. Now, it's two things to point out in this shit that we read across, right? One, if these people was attacking all their ships on the waters, raiding their towns and taking their people, then why would, that's just dumb. Why would you send a ship to the west coast of Africa in the heart of your motherfucking enemy? That's like some street shit. Ain't no crip gonna go into a blood neighborhood, and especially not the heart of that motherfucker, to go whoop on the nigga. You feel me? Like, stop playing, man. You feel me? Secondly, it shows also that this was two ideological wars, that there is no way that the Arabs was trading slaves with these European nations, because they was in tour with each other, not only on, like, it was more of a deep personal fucking level. So how in the hell is these European nations were getting slaves from Muslim crusaders? Because they told us that shit too. So this when you got to start questioning everything when the evidence start presenting itself. But let's keep going. What was I at? It may have been this spurn of vengeance, as opposed to the bland workings of the marketplace, that made the Islamic slavers so much more aggressive and initially, one might say, successful in their work than their Christian counterparts. By all indication, as this study attempts to show, Mediterranean slaving outproduced the transatlantic slave trade during the 16th and 17th century. And this is only in terms of the Barbary coast. So let's stop here. The Mediterranean outproducing the transatlantic slave trade in the 16th and 17th century. And this is only in terms of the Barbary coast. So this don't count the Maghreb that they also spoke on, and it don't count the attack that was being done on the East Coast. And they get into that. Without taking into account Muslim slaving activities in Levant, Eastern Europe, nor the counter-enslavement that some Christian states were practicing at the same time on their Islamic foes. In the long run, however, market imperatives would give American slavery and the transatlantic slave trade more staying power than the Maghrebian virgin, which was merely less concerned with profiting from laboring a slave than in using them to secure the status of their individual masters to power large-scale building programs for the states they owe. It was at just about the same time when Mediterranean slave began to falter around the mid 1600s. Now, this is where we got to stop. Because this shit talking about from the 1500s to the 1800s. All right. Let's keep going. That the transatlantic slave trade really took off. A second surge of this poisonous wave that brought American slavery to a peak in the later 17th. It has been 30 years since Eugene Genovese published Roll Jordan Roll, which presented a striking portrait of American slave culture as seen from the inside as it was live. Genovese is just one of many scholars working of the last generation that have made it all but unthinkable to assert, even to imply that slavery in America provided its victim with the sort of paternalistic care, ultimately civilized influence that an antebellum supporter once claimed for, that certain schools of American historical thought kept alive until well into the 20th century. Interestingly, over this same generation, scholarship on the Barbary Coast slavery has been tending in just the opposite direction, with the flows and edibles of post-colonial and postmodern thoughts much more inclined, at least implicably, to treat slaves, there are pre-imperialists and their master, as proto-nationalists. Some have suggested that for white European enslavement in the Maghreb was no more cruel or brutal than prison or even ordinary working life. Oh, shit. In much of Europe.
Hey, man,
Others have chosen.
My bad, brother.
No, you good, bro. Make sure y'all hit that like button, man. Others have chosen to emphasize instance of Muslim masters kind treating on their busmen. History is often as not our present politics projected on the past. And the ways in which the intellectual tide has flowed in different direction over these two sorts of slavery may well say more about our own times than about the world of 300 years ago. Yet even 2 or 3 centuries ago, many Europeans apparently agreed with the French clergyman Philemon de la Motte that as for slaves at Algeria, they are not indeed so unhappy with the French traveler claims that no white slaves in Maghreb really suffered. Those dismissal miseries which monks and other designed persons who have experienced this servitude will make the world believe. Such asserts, all right, and that's why I read it all. Because some people gonna hear that and be like, ha ha, nah, nigga, pay attention. Such assertion may have fitted in well with the anti-clericalism and newfound enthusiasm for other things Oriental that marked those enlightened times, even as attempt today to cast white slavery never as stringy or literature tropes, several removes from experience, or to endow the slave themselves with the imperial gaze may well satisfy many academic tempers of our time. Nevertheless, slave studies in America has done much to remind us. And why should we need reminding? That in slavery, wherever it is mitigating circumstances or literary possibility, still means the loss of freedom of action, the denial of personhood, and at some level, constant climate of coerced violence. All right. But still, they are slaves, as always hated on accounts of their religion and incessantly overburdened with labor. We may wish to appreciate the Turk and Moorish cultures that shaped the Barbary Regency. Indeed, we should, but not deny the basic humanity, the perception of the experience of slaves themselves, many of who certainly suffered, just as many also died. It was in good part for this reason that I have chosen the epigraph to this introduction, which includes the phrase barbarian cruelty. Not perhaps the most acceptable phrase for the new millennium, but one very much in line with how the victims of the Khosars slaving saw the relationships between their captors and themselves 2 centuries ago. Indeed, several books from those days carrying those words from their title and the terms recurs the narratives in many languages. You got it, bro. I got to take this call real quick.
Nah, you good, big. You good, bro. Hey, so y'all heard what he was saying, leading up into the Barbary Coast. So while that's going on around the 1500s, leading up to the 1600s, we're gonna also show you what's going on in America simultaneously. So let's get to that. All right. Hopefully y'all can see. All righty. All right. David Byrne Davis writing in the New York Reviews of a book, October 11th, 1990, page 37 states, as late as the 14th and 15th century, continuing shipments of white slaves, some of them Christian, followed the booming slave market of the northern Black Sea coast into Italy, Spain, Egypt, and to the Mediterranean island. From Barbados to Virginia, colonists showed few scruples, excuse me, about reducing their less fortunate countrymen into a status little different from that of chattel slavery. So even the Europeans that was in the area was getting treated different by some of these Jews that was in the had their hand in Kanazis from certain parts of Europe. They had their hand in the slave trade, and they treated the other country white man the same as the slaves. The prevalence of suffering of the whites, surfers, and indentured servants in the early modern period suggests that there was nothing inevitable about limiting plantation slavery to people of African origin. So, okay, that's what they wanted to deal with, the origin, African origin. So this is another statement. R. Rusham's the source of racial thought in the colony America, state that the slave trade worked out in both directions with white merchants as well as black. Okay, that's the Journal of Negro History. That's on page 52. You also go to page 251 and 273. Okay, in 1659, the English Parliament debate that the practice of selling British whites into slavery in the New World. In a debate that whites were referred not as indentured servants, but as slaves, whose enslavement threatened the liberties of all Englishmen. Thomas Burton, the Parliament Diaries of 1656. You can go to page 59, volume 4, page 253 and 274 as well. Foster R. Dulles, The Labor in America quotes in the early documents describing white children in colonial servitude as crying and mourning for redemption from their slavery. Okay, so let's get into the next little part of this. Okay, okay, let's go. All right, this is slavery in America. Let's get into the slavery in America. My bad, you guys. All right, let's get into it. Many graduations of unfreedom among white made it difficult to draw fast lines between any idealized free white worker and the pitted or scorned several black worker in the label short in 1700s, right? In the 1700s, what do you got in the 1800s? You got Christian color codes that's starting to take place, right? Which is the racial divide that started to go on. So as that goes on, I'm gonna skip to something real quick, and we're gonna get into why was it racial divide. Let's get into that. Give me just a second. All right. All right, let's get into it. Want to make sure y'all can see everything loud and clear. All right.
Cause of the Civil War, a new look at the slavery issue. One of the things that has always puzzled me about the history of the United States is how a civil war could be fought and won to end slavery, but full civil rights not be granted to blacks until a century later. Tenzer's The Forgotten Cause of the Civil War suggests that one of the major contributions to tension between North and South, and hence one of the causes of the Civil War, was white slavery, or the perception of slavery by Northerners as a personal threat. Tenzer begins with the legal definition of slavery and of terms such as white, black, and mulatto, which often differed from the social definitions. The partis sequitur ventrum rule made the offspring of a slave mother slaves, regardless of their color. No slave could be white, of course, so white slaves were classified as mulattoes. Chapter 2 looks at the consequence of this rule, the presence of white slaves in the South. Tenzer makes no attempt to provide quantitative figures here, stressing instead the accessibility of accounts of white slaves in the North, notably advertisements for runaway slaves who could pass as white.
So do y'all hear? Do y'all hear what this is saying right now? I just want to make sure this is clear. Okay,
Loud.
let me run that. Let me run that little part back. Let me run that back. Let me run that back.
You want me to read that out, bro?
And definition of slavery and of terms such as white, black, and mulatto, which often differed from the social definitions. The partis sequitur ventrum rule made the offspring of a slave mother slaves, regardless of their color. No slave could be white, of course, so white slaves were classified as mulattoes. Chapter 2 looks at the consequence of this rule, the presence of white slaves in the South. Tenzer makes no attempt to provide quantitative figures here, stressing instead the accessibility of accounts of white slaves in the North, notably advertisements for runaway slaves who could pass as white. However many of them there actually were, the idea of slaves indistinguishable from free whites was widespread in the North. Chapter 3 looks at Southern racial theory. In particular, the fabrication of figures for insanity in the 1840 census and Drive Knott's idea that mulattoes were unhealthier and shorter lived than black slaves. This leads to a chapter on the illicit slave trade, which Tenzer argues is the explanation for census results showing an apparently higher fecundity for black slaves than for free blacks and mulattoes. His argument for an extensive illicit slave trade, continued in an appendix, is indirect but persuasive.
So do you see do you understand what he's saying? That they changed the game around this 17, 18 time area. They started making shit synonymous. They even started switching shit up on paper and document to prove and try to hide that these white people were slaves. In fact, they was making it seem like that the term black or free white persons or free black persons was a slave. You got to go to the term free inhabitants. This is really going to explain the true people of this land. So when you get into the term free blacks and mulattoes, which we know mulattoes was often used synonymous with white slaves at a particular time after Christian color code, because white slavery was still going on. I just want to show y'all that while I was right here at the other one. So let's get back to where we was. All right, so that's showing you what was going on during that particular time. In Massachusetts, the court assisted, whose records date to 1633, we find a 1638 description of a white man on Gal's player as having been delivered up for a slave. Okay, delivered up for a slave. So he was sold for slavery. Okay, into Massachusetts document 1633. Right, whether he was free when he came here, he was sold into slavery in 1638. The Englishman William Edis, after observing white slaves in America in the 1700s work, generally speaking, they groaned beneath a worse than Egyptian bondage. The letter from America, London, 1972. Governor Sharp of the Maryland colony compared the property interests of the planters and their white slaves, with the estate of the English farmers consisting of a multitude of chattel. So it's comparing this shit, even though they was calling these people white slaves, they was comparing it to the chattel, the harsh chattel that was going on in London, in Britain, right? Dealing with Cromwell, brutally killing them and beating these people. This is when you find these cases of the young boy been beaten to death and threw out in rubbish. Let's get on down to the rest of this as well. So these are all quotes. You can go to these particular sources. It's giving you the sources as I read. The Quack Walker case in Massachusetts in the 1783, which ruled that slavery was contrary to the, to the state constitution, was appealed, equal to blacks and whites in Massachusetts. Right, so it's saying that whites was getting treated the same way as blacks, and you can't change that. They had no other ruling where they had any other status higher than blacks once they was in slavery. This is according to 1783 records in the case in Massachusetts. This is after the 17 Christian Color Code. I just want to make sure. So there were still laws and other things being affected in other areas outside of the colony. Disciplinary in the review of laws of the early Virginia Circuit, 1631 to 1645, did not discriminate Negroes in bondage from whites in bondage. William Henry, right? Statutes at Large of Virginia, volumes 1, page 174, 198, 200, 243, and 306. For records of wills in which lands, goods, and chattels and cattle, monies and Negroes, English servants, horse, sheep, and household stuff were all sold together. See the Lancaster County records in England in the Virginia Colony Abstract, Beverly Fleet editor. So when people want to talk about slave documents, they don't got them. They have these things on record. They got them on record just as well. They sold land, when they sold other goods, chattel, cattle, anything. Sheep, horse, household item, you was documented with a receipt ledger that documented what was going on. So everything has a receipt. Now let's get to the bottom of this. Lay historian colonist A.B. Ellis, writing in the British newspaper Argosy, I don't know how to fucking pronounce that name, May 6, 1893. Few but readers of old colony state papers and records are rare, but between the years 1649 and 1690, a lively trade was carried on between England and the plantations, as the colonies were then called the political prisoners, where they were sold by auction to the colonists for various terms of years, sometimes for life. And this is strictly dealing with white slaves, even been put on auction boards, like you see misquotably talked about your ancestors. Sir George Sanders, 1618, Plan of Virginia, referred to the bondage whites assigned to the treasurer of office to belong to said office forever. The servants of whites bond to Berkeley's hundreds was deemed hold on, let me get down to it. Sorry. Hundreds were deemed perpetual. Lewis Cecil Gray, historian of agriculture in the southern United States to 1860, volume 1, page 316 to 318. And I'm going to stop right there because we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to go into the next list of things with dealing with some of the later age and how things change with things in America with colonization. So I'm going to pause that right there. Hope y'all enjoy that. Shout out to the brother Truth. I don't know if he's still with us or not.
Oh, nigga, I was talking this shit. My shit was muted. You feel me? Yeah, yes, sir.
Shout
Yes.
out to the guy. Shout out to the guy.
So a lot of people, while I was coming with, man, the whole premise of doubling back and forth, bro, showing you what's going on with them in America, and me showing you what's going on their own fucking coast and right south of them and shit, is to show you that it's too many obstacles to overcome to be doing what they said they was fucking doing. You feel me? So I'm gonna get back into where I was at with the information and shit. And the first thing I want to do is to show you that you know this African connection was more than just the Barbary Coast. And I'm gonna show you to how this thing go in. So I'm gonna go and share my screen, bro. And you can go and pull that up for me, and we gonna get more in depth about that shit.
For sure. Make sure y'all hit the like button and share it on all your social media outlets. Make sure you share this on all your. Hit the like button.
All right. So the first place I want to go is right here. All right. This is the introduction into the Ottoman Empire and the Barbary Cossars, 1450 to 1550. A relationship examined. Battles on the seas are more dangerous and fierce than battles on the land. For on the sea there is no recoiling nor fleeing. There is no remedy but to fight and to abide fortune. And every man shows his prowess. John Froissart, 14th Century Chronicles. All right. Military histories of the Ottoman Empire, written mostly by European scholars, have a tendency to emphasize Ottoman's naval weakness, which revisionist historian Daniel Goffman argues can be attributed to bias written of history in Europe. Bias. Look that up. Goffman states that the contemporary Christian powers laid claim to any Ottoman maritime success on behalf of Christian renegades, predominantly Greeks, in service to the Ottoman Empire. So let's run that back, because we know they like to steal people greatness. Let's read that again. Goffman state that the contemporary Christian powers laid claim to any Ottoman maritime success on behalf of Christian renegades, predominantly Greeks, in service to the Ottoman fleet. However, Islamic histograph contains no such negative image of an era which was in their history filled with both land and sea victories, suggesting that both sides of the conflict have aimed to confirm the superiority of their respective cultures. Andrew Hayes highlight the problem of studying the Ottoman naval power for the first beginning, that the fact seaborne community came into beginning in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, that would be the 14th and 1600s. Secondly, the sophisticated historical literature on the Islamic world is rare, which lead most writers to approach Eastern history only through questions related to European matters. Most recent work had argument that the Ottoman demonstrate a naval competence at sea, which was due to their own merits of service, skilled Greek mariners, or more importantly, a coalition with the Barbary coast. All right. Now, here's the source. Constantinople, the last great siege, 1453, the Ottoman Empire in early modern Europe. That was by Cambridge and the American Historical Review. The evolution of the Ottoman seaborne empire, the age of Islamic discoveries. Now, the main thing, I just want to show that connection to the Barbary Coast, that they wasn't Barbary Coast. They wasn't just a single area. They had a arm's reach of a powerful empire in a bag. However, disdained Europeans were of Ottoman naval powers. Even the great maritime power of England feared them, with King Henry urging peace with the Turks in 1502. They were to continue to be perennial irritation to the English states throughout the century, even to the extent of royal orders being given that special prayers to be read in religious service against the Turks. So basically, he made it a law that everyone had to pray in church against the powers of these Islamic people. You feel me? David Starkley has claimed essentially the Barbary Cossars were the naval arm of the Islam engaged in eternal war with Christendom. It is claimed that the studies aim to address both in the light of Kossar contributions to the Ottoman naval campaigns and view the conflict as a holy war. Originating from the steppes of Central Asia, the Ottomans had no traditional naval warfare, and as initially land-based empire, they had no initial need of one, but their empire grew. They came face to powerful maritime nation, and the creation of a permanent naval force became an essential part of who the fuck calling me? Of their success. All right. Now we can move up out of here, and I want to go right here. Islam, slavery, the political transformation. Hold on, where's Islam, slavery, and the political transformation in West Africa, constraints on the transatlantic slave trade. So basically, it was a problem for the transatlantic slave trade. Let's get right here to the first abstract. This article examines the relative importance of Muslim merchants in the slave trade of West Africa, including both the transatlantic world and the trans-Saharan Islamic heartland. It is argued that the Muslim involvement in the slave trade limited the development of the Atlantic economy and reinforced the Islamic world that remained largely anonymous. That is, Muslim commercial activity actually constrained the exports of slaves across the Atlantic. The Islamic factor, and particularly the political transformation associated with jihad, explain the comparative low levels of exports to the Americas from Muslim areas and areas where Muslim merchants were present. Fewer slaves came from the area of Muslim dominance and influence than might otherwise have been expected. Since slavery was widespread in these areas, constituents a mode of production that integrated enslavement, slave trade, and slave use on a large scale. Since this integrated system, the interior of West Africa did not become a major source of slaves for the Americas. I'm going to run that back. Since the integrated system, the interior of West Africa did not become a major source of slaves for the Americas, and indeed seems to have behaved in ways that resisted incorporations in the European dominated Atlantic world as it evolved in the 18th century and 19th century. That would be the 1800s and 1900s. This resistance is measured by the scales of slavery in the economies of the Muslim areas of West Africa. By comparing the number of enslaved Africans who were taken to the Americas with those who have come from the Muslim areas of West Africa, by the activities of the Muslim commercial class that dominated trade, including the slave trade with the Atlantic coast of West Africa. Cultural, religious, and political factors explain the restriction of the trade with the Atlantic world. Hence, the transformation in slavery in Muslim areas was largely directed internally. All right. The article examined the relative importance of Muslim merchants in the slave trade of West Africa, including both the transatlantic world and the trans-Saharan Islamic heartland. It is argued that Muslim involvement in the slave trade limited the development of the Atlantic economy and reinforced the Islamic world that remained largely anonymous. That is, Muslim commercial activity actually constrained the export of slaves across the Atlantic. The Islamic factor, and particularly the political transformation associated with jihad, explains the comparatively low levels of exports to the Americas from Muslim areas and areas where Muslim merchants were present. Fewer slaves came from areas of Muslim dominance and influence that might otherwise have been expected. Since slavery was widespread in the areas constituting a mode of product that integrated enslavement, slave trade, and slave use on large scales. Since the integrated system, the interior of West Africa did not become a major source of slaves for the America. Indeed, seems to have behaved in ways that resisted incorporation into the European dominated Atlantic world as it evolved in the 18th and early 19th century. This resistance is measured by the scales of slavery and economy of the Muslim areas of West Africa by comparing the numbers of enslaved Africans who were taken to the Americas with those who could have come from Muslim areas of West Africa, and by activities of the Muslim commercial class that dominated trade, including the slave trade with the Atlantic coast of West Africa. You feel me? Now, this is This is a research funded by the Social Science Humanity Research Council of Canada and the Canada Research Chair in African Diaspora History. So that's where this is coming from. Now we're going to get into one more introduction, then I'm going to move on to the next. The article re-examined the organization and structure of the slave trade in West Africa's focusing specifically on relatively important location of Muslim merchant. It has argued, all right, that basically is re-saying what we all read. I'm going to get past that. But if anybody want to do it, I'll drop the link. You know, I ain't got shit to lie about. They running that shit back. It is argued here that fewer slaves came from the Muslim dominance influence that might otherwise have been expected since slavery was widespread in these areas. Constituent has presented elsewhere that integrated enslavement, slave trade, and slave use on large scales. The concept mode of product have been employed to emphasize the relationship between social organization and the production process on the one hand, and by means which relationships are maintained on the other. Despite the consolidation of this integrated system of enslavement, slave trade, and domestic use of slaves, the interior of West Africa did not become a major source of slaves for the Americans. It's like, goddamn, how many times they gonna keep reinforcing that shit? You feel me? But let's go. All right. It's this it right here. Let's show you what was going on the west coast of Africa. You feel me? All right. This article is introduces narratives by actual American captives during and after the Barbary War, Barbary Wars, 1801 through 1805 and 1815. I keep telling y'all that these people did not start trying to get into Africa until the 1800s. This is by Paul Bayflair. I guess that's how you pronounce it. Although Barbary pirateers began to take North American colonists as early as 1625, the written genre of Barbary captivity narrative didn't flourish in the United States until the early 19th century. During these years, several survivors of Barbary captivity published immense popular accounts of their suffering in North Africa. The story of Barbary captivity became a common tale that involved hundreds of men and women evoked public subscription for ransom funds, forced the government to pay humiliating tributes and cash and arms to African rulers. Stimulated to the drive to create the U.S. Navy and brought about the first post-revolutionary war. Among other things, these narratives reveal some of the earliest impression of Americans had on Africa at a time when the issue of chattel slavery in the United States increasingly divided the country. So how could we be in the country divided and be from Africa, but these people is getting the narrative of what the fuck an African really is, and it don't look good. If anything, it'll tell you the motherfucker stay the fuck away. You feel me? In my opinion. The account by Captain James Riley, look up Captain James Riley, for example, sold nearly 1 million copies. An Abraham Lincoln biographer credit Riley's narrative for helping to change the future president's stance on slavery. Now, bro, did you just say that when we just talking about the unforgotten wars of slavery and shit, and how the white slaves and shit is what really changed Abraham Lincoln mind and shit, bro?
Facts.
And you showing it from American perspective, but then I'm adding on top of that American perspective about these white Americans being enslaved where? In Africa. So let's get on to my next one. This is called American Slaves, African Masters. If anybody want to get that. I didn't want to get in too deep with that. But I wanted to get into this. Now I ain't gonna lie, I didn't buy the book. This West African content was actually put into the age of the Journal of African History. So this research done on West Africa and shit is actually added into the Journal of African History. You feel me? So let's let you know they did their due diligence, but let's go. All right. Paul Lovejoy is the author of many rare books that cover a wide range of topics, the subjects such as narrative slaves, Islam, and the political and social economy of slavery and the slave trade in West Africa and the Americas. In addition to the original contribution to each of those topics, he had decisively engaged with issues of method, theory, sources, as well as historiography associated with them. After having illustrated in his previous book the changing political, social, religious, ideological, demographic landscapes of West Africa in the area of the Atlantic slave trade, this book mounts a methodology challenge to the occlusion of Africanist scholarship in Atlantic studies and confront the inhibition to historical reconstruction that such ignorance have produced in historical literature. All right. Jihad in West Africa during the Age of Revolution, which will be between 1720s into the 1800s, is a very bold intervention in three broad fields of historical inquiry, including the histories of West Africa jihad in the late 18th to the second half of the 19th century, and the Age of Revolution in Western Europe and the Atlantic world. The ambition of this book are to engage with the definition of Atlantic studies, proposed an interpretation of the West African jihad in the Age of Revolution, incorporated African history and global history, and reassess and redress the misunderstanding of the role of Islam in Africa and in the world. So basically, this scholar and African diaspora that is well known in his field and respected is telling you that even when you're looking at the Age of Revolution in Western Europe and the Atlantic world, that none of this shit is actually tying in the actual history of fucking Africa, but they telling you that they got you from Africa. But they never added the evidence in there. So now that's what fam them doing. Shout out to them. I appreciate them for that. All right. What unites previous studies of jihad and the Age of Revolution, Lovejoy point out in their consistent omission of collective silence on West Africa. So, you know, man, y'all niggas gonna stop making it seem like West Africa was just some old primitive ass place where they was able to run up in there. Like, nah, man. Shout out to them guys from West Africa, man. They was really holding it the fuck down and shit, man. They won't let nobody take their motherfucking people. You feel me? They had big bro Ottoman empire on their back. And they was banging on motherfucking the whole Europe and Asia. So, but you got it, big bro, man. I'm gonna go and let you grab it from here, then we can move from that shit.
Nah, it's definitely fire, G. We working our way on up though. So you know what I'm saying? Hopefully everybody is keeping up with what's going on. Make sure y'all hit the like button and make sure y'all smacking the like button and sharing this around to all your social media. All right. So let's go. All right, we're gonna go. We back at the book. They were slaves and they were white. This is the book. We're gonna get right back into the introduction. They were two sorts. First, such as were brought over by masters of the ships to be sold as servants, such as we call them dear, says she. But they are more properly called slaves. Daniel Defoe, Molly Flanders. Right, so that's from Molly Flanders. This is a history of white people that has never been told in the coherent form, largely because most modern historians have the reason of political and psychological refuse to recognize white slaves in America as just that. Today, okay, let's highlight this. We're right here. We're gonna work our way down to there, okay? Let's go. Today, not a tear is shed on the sufferings of millions of their own enslaved forefathers. 200 years of white slavery in America have been almost completely obliterated from the collective memory of the American people. Who wants to be reminded that half, perhaps as many as thirds of the original American colonists came here not of their own free will, but kidnapped, uh, uh, I don't know what the fuck that word is. Hanged, impressed, duped, beguiled, and yes, in chains. We tend to gloss over it. We prefer to forget the whole sorry chapter. Elaine Kendall, Los Angeles Times, right? You can find the actual post. Just type in the Los Angeles Times, September the 1st, 1985. A correct understanding of the authentic history of the enslavement of whites in America could have profound consequences for the futures of the races. We cannot be sure that the position of the early Africans differed markedly from the whites in the indentured service. The debate has considerable significance for the interpretation of race relations in America. Eugene D. Giovannis, Roe Jordan, right? The world the slaves made, right? That's another book. Let's get into it. And let's get right up to it. Let's highlight the next scene. Let's go. Most of the books of white labor in America are titled with the words white indentured servants, white bond servants, white servants, etc. It is interesting that the white people who were bonded into these conditions of what became many cases permanent chattel slavery into death are not referred to as slaves by established academics. With the masses concentrating of educational and media resources on the Negro experience of slavery, the unspoken assumptions has been. Hold on just a second, you guys. Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back. Hold on. I'm sorry about that, you guys. All right, let's get right back to it. Was I ever screen sharing?
Nah, you ain't even screen sharing, bro.
I was never screen sharing. All right. This is what I was screen sharing. I'll leave it on there for just a few seconds before I get right back to where I was. I'm sorry about that. I thought you would have let me know, G. Damn, G. Now I'll just fuck with you.
Man, I'll read some
Uh,
shit, bro. My bad, man.
you all good. All right, so let's go. We're gonna get right back to it. Let's get off where we was. Most of the books of white labor in America titled these words white indentured servants, white bondsmen, white servants, etc. It's interesting that these white people who were in bondage as a condition what became the most permanent chattel slavery unto death are not referred to as slaves by academics, by established academics. With the masses concentrating on educational and media resources of the Negro experience of slavery, the unspoken assumption has been that only blacks have been enslaved to any degree or magnitude worthy of studying or memorial. The historical records reveal that it is not in the case. However, white people have been sold as slaves for centuries. And then right here, it gets into early history of white slaves in ancient and medieval Europe. I'm not going to read that right here, but hold on just a second. But what I am going to do, I'm going to skip here. We're going to go right down. We're going to read on the slender bias of those few words from John Rolfe describing the bartering of the 20 and the odd Negroes, historical mound of the story of the Dutch slave trader selling the first slaves to America. Book after book enlisted at the border point comfort as the monument slavery began. In reality, the road to slavery were already beginning, laid throughout indentured service, and John Lupé's Africans were merely joining it for for they were hold on, let me see. John Lupe's African was merely joining it, for they too were treated as indentured servants. No flood of Africans. Highlight this right here. I believe the brother Truth might have fell out. Let me get the brother back in here. Get my brother back in here. Okay, let's get right back to it. Sorry about that. No flood of Africans allowed them the transaction of a one-off. Although the Dutch and Portuguese were bringing out slaves in their thousands from Africa for the monument, therefore there was no market for them in Virginia. 6 years later, in 1625, there were still only 23 Africans in the colony. Many decades later, there were still only a few hundred. That would change late in the century. But for the moment, the poor England remained the colony remains the poor England remained the colony's main source of chattel labor. You know they didn't want to say slavery. So you notice that they brought up the John Rolfe in the 16 Negro story. Let's try to get this is actual document record. Let's get into it. Let's see if we can find it. So listen, let's get into it. What we reading right here is the actual documents written in 1619. This is the National Archive. This is actual records, virginiaencyclopedia.org. You can go get these books. I'm going to go to a more clear breakdown of what was going on. Let's go. Cattle in the trail came exceedingly well. The gal, the colony, much joy in the great encouragement. Now, mind you, these are old English words, so a lot of these words are fucked up, so bear with me. Both the horses and mares will be variable venturable here a long time. The colony's increasing with people as of late. About the latter, about the later end of August, a Dutchman of war in the burden of 160 tombs arrived at Point Comfort. The commander are named Captain Joe and his pilot for the West Indies, right? So what it's pretty much saying is that these people headed out to the West Indies, right? So let's go back to the original document. And this is on page 243 of the John Rolfe letters. This is documented. All right, so let's get to it. It said these, and the pilot went to the West Indies. Mr. Mercabadou, an Englishman, they met with the treasurer in the West Indies, determined that the threshold that they would threshold a consort ship Heatherward, which means pretty much invade the ship. They're gonna invade the ship, take whatever they got. But in the middle of it, it said in the passage, in the middle of it, which means in the passage, lost one the other. So lost one of the other. So that means they lost a couple men in the middle of trying to get Purdue, the Portuguese, from bringing their Negroes from the West Indies to England. They was headed out to England, right? He brought not anything to 20 odd Negroes, which the government of Cape Merchants brought the victims, and he created it and needed to pretend at the best, at the easiest race he could, had a large or ample commission from his had large. Hold on. Law commission from his exceedingly to range and take purchase in the West Indies. So once he figured out that the English people had got these slaves, he like, damn, why weren't we going out there? So this is when you started seeing this particular slave trade start to go out that way, but they never really successfully made it due to the wars that was taking place. So that's actually the John Rolfe letters, records of Virginia Company, right? Dealing with John Rolfe letters and the 20 odd Negroes. Okay. So that's that particular document. I will drop that PDF for you guys. I will drop that particular PDF. All right. So where was I at? Let's get to it. All right, let's go. All right, so back where we was on the original one, right? So we was in 1783, the rule of slavery, dealing with these slave laws, dealing with white slavery all in America by documented records of government documents, right? White people documents, right? Patrick L. Morin, in a historical sketch of the persecution suffered by the Catholics of Ireland, refers to the transportation of the Irish to the colonies as the slave trade, right? That's on page 343 and 346. The disciplinary and the revenue laws of the early Virginia Circuit, 1631-1645, did not discriminate Negroes in bondage from whites in bondage. That's from William Henry, editor, Statutes at the Large of Virginia, Volume 1, page 174, 198, 200, 243, 306. I believe I just read this. So let me go down. I did read that. Let me move forward. All right, certainly, let's get into it. Certainly, the enslaved whites themselves recognized their condition with painful clarity. As one white man named Abraham, right? Oh, we just read that too, who accused of trying to negate the rebellion, stated to his fellows, "Wherefore should we stay here and be slaves?" So he even knew his white ass could possibly be a slave. Because whites were just the easiest motherfuckers to enslave. They was cheap and they was disposable, right? Even Abraham Lincoln himself says that. And in a statement smuggled out of the New World and published in London, whites in bondage did not call themselves indentured servants. The writing refers to them as English slavers, merchants. So you can get that from the Marcellus Rivers and the Oxenbridge Foil, England's Slavery, 1659. An eyewitness like Perry Labrat, who visited the West Indies slave plantations in the 1700s, which were built in Maine by white slaves, labeled them white slaves. Nothing less. Members of Pierre Labette in 1693, 1705, page 125. Even blacks were referred to white forced laborers in the colonies as white slaves. Colonial of Office, Public Records of Office, right? London, 1667. That's on number, that's in page 70. Soy factor, or A Voyage to Maryland. A pamphlet circulated in 1708 articulates that the plight of tens of thousands of pathetic young white girls kidnapped from England and enslaved in the colonies of America, laminating that. Let's get into the leather. In better times, to this land, I will unhappily turpended, not then a slave, but things are changed, kidnapped in food. The height of the academic media fraud is revealed that the monopolistic trademark status of the official controllers of the education in mass communication, such as successfully established between the definition of the word slavery and the Negro, while labeling descriptions of historical experience of whites in slavery as a fallacy, right? Yet the very word slave, which established consensus school of history pretends cannot legitimately be applied to whites. And we're going to get into the history of it not being allowed to be applied to whites because it was certain laws that was being established. So we'll get into it. It derived from the word Slav. According to Oxford English Dictionary, the word Slav is another name for the white people of Eastern Europe, the Slavs. The compact edition of the Oxford Dictionary. So let's get into it, and I'm done with this. And the word, in other words, slaves were has always been the term and the definition of the several conditions of white people. Yet we are told by the professional professor professional that is not correct to refer to white as slaves, but only as servants, even though the very root of the derived historical fact, white slavery. So even though man, they deny it in academic studies. They call them servant bonds, watchmen, merchants, prisoners, and these people are slaves. They are the epitome of the reason we even use that word. And I'm gonna let the brother Truth go in right now, man. So appreciate everybody. Hopefully y'all enjoying the build. Hopefully y'all getting enough information. Make sure y'all hit the like button. You're gonna have to unmute yourself, but make sure y'all
Yeah,
hit the
yeah,
like button.
yeah. Yeah. Now, before I go in, I just want to reinforce, what the brother is talking about. But another thing that niggas need to get through their head is that, it's a lot of Negro slave owners that motherfuckers don't speak of. A lot of us own slaves. You feel me? And that's virtually impossible to be enslaving the people of the same people. It just doesn't make sense. You feel me? Where the fuck is that shit at? Man, this fucking computer moving slow than a motherfucker. Let's see. Give me 1 second, bro. 1 second. Cause we gonna get right into it. All right.
Oh, let me pull you up. My bad, G.
Nah, I just started pulling it up, so you can go and pull me up, man. We can just get right into this motherfucker. Let me know when I'm visible.
You ready? You loud? You live?
All right, cool. So right now, we gonna get into a personal account of one of these white slaves that cannot be denied. You feel me? Ain't no denying this. She's on the record. You feel me? A white skin is no security whatsoever. I should no more dare to send white children out to play alone, especially at night. Then I should dare send them into a forest of tigers and hyenas. This was written by Parker Pillsbury to William Lloyd Garrison. That name, do that name ring a bell? William Lloyd Garrison in 1853. So it show you how far this shit go. One day in the spring of 1843, Mr. Carl Roof, a German immigrant, went into a cafe on Levi Street in New Orleans. The slave who served her looked familiar, and eventually Madame Carl, as she was known, realized that the woman was one of her compatriots, Salome Muller. The two had last seen each other more than 2 decades earlier when they both arrived in the city with several hundreds other Germans. Muller's mother and infant brother had not survived the voyage, and her father and older brother died soon after arrival. Salome and her sister Dorothy, both under age 6, has never been seen or heard from again. Madame Carl questioned the slave, who displayed no recollection of her previous life. She explained that she was the property of Louis Belmonte, owner of the cafe. Madame Carl then took Muller to the home of Eve and Francis Gerber, who had traveled on the same voyage. Mr. Scruber was Muller's cousin and godmother. The Scruber also positively identified who this is, and then this is the evidence. Sally Miller versus Louis Belmonte and John Miller. Called into warranty, First District Court of Louisiana, July 24th, 1844. Docket number 223-041, Supreme Court of Louisiana Collection at Earl K. Lone Library, University of Louisiana, and hereafter referred to as Miller versus Belmonte in 1844. You feel me? So I can get up out of that. That's just to show a first-hand account of a fucking actual white slave that was also classified as a fucking Negro. But then let me take it to over. Bam. Now, for some reason, this is the reason why This is the way that is pulling up. Let me see if I can see another format. Okay, there we go. Bam. All right. It's called Free Negro Owners of Slaves in the United States in 1830. All right. Let me get to the page. All right. Let me blow this shit up. All right, the aim of this report on the free Negroes is to facilitate the further study of the neglected group. Most of these people have been forgotten. For persons supposedly well informed in history are surprised to learn today that about 500,000, almost 1/7 of the Negroes of this country was free prior to the emancipation. It is hardly believed that the considerable number of Negroes were owners of slaves themselves, in some cases controlled large plantations. There were several reasons for selecting the census of the 1830s in the first place. In the 1830s, in the first place, the earliest report do not give as much information as the census of the 1830s. At that time, moreover, the free Negroes had about reached their highest mark as a distinct class. The reaction set which set early. Let me see. All right, the reaction which set in earlier in the century restricted their freedom and in many cases expelled from the South. This census then evidently report the names of large numbers of representatives, free Negroes, than any other census prior to their databasement to a lower status or their migrations from the South. This trek reached its highest between 1830 and 1835. Most of the free Negroes in the North in 1830 therefore have been there for some years. The census records show the majority of Negro owners, the majority of the Negroes owners of slaves were from such points of view of philanthropists. In many instances, the husband purchased the wife or vice versa. Yeah, whatever, nigga. The slaves belonging to such family were few compared with the large numbers found among the well-developed plantations. The slaves of the Negroes were in some cases the children of free fathers who was purchased his wife. He did not thereafter emancipate the mother, as so many such husbands failed to do. All right, so basically, they kept their wives as they slaves. I mean, I don't know. I think it's like a little bit more in depth into that. That'll be more it's family wise or some shit like that. You feel me? But here it is. You got a lot of Negro slave owners that they don't speak about. They only talk about us being slaves, but they never talk about us owning slaves or not about they self motherfucking being slaves. Benevolent Negroes often purchase slaves to make their lot easier by granting them freedom for a numerous sum, by permitting them to work it out on a liberal term. John Berry Markham, a Negro Baptist minister in St. Louis, thus came into possession of as many as 20 slaves by 1836. 20 slaves by 1836. Thus did Samuel Gibson, a Negro of Mississippi, in 1844 when he bought his 6 slaves to Cincinnati, Ohio, and them on free territory. All right. So it's just pretty much just to piggyback off, bro. Just to show that not only was these motherfuckers, they have a lot of white slaves here, you had a lot of Negro owners that own slaves, as many as 20 of them. So you got it from there right there, bro. I'm gonna AP. Where you at, Brody? Where you at?
I'm over here talking my shit muted like a motherfucker, G. My bad, fam. But shit, yeah, I'm ready. Let's get it. Hey, so yeah, man. So you pretty much getting what's going on with slavery in America. You know, the first slaves here was obviously what you see as white slaves. Hold on a second. I think somebody just came out. Okay. My bad, brother. Truth. Can you hear me now?
Yup. Yeah. You get me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. But yeah, man. So yeah, that was pretty much the introduction part. So let's keep it going with the introduction. Let's keep it going with the introduction. Don't want to go too far. My bad, you guys. Hold on. Let me try and pull it up. Accidentally got off the screen. Hold on. My bad. Sorry about that. Trying to find it. All right, we ready. All right, let's get it. So many screen share. Make sure you hit that like button, y'all, man. Show some love, man. Support the channel. Make sure y'all show some love and support the channel.
Hey, hey,
All
P.
right. Yeah.
Nah, you got it,
Yeah.
bro. Go ahead. Mute up.
Now go ahead. Go ahead. You want to go ahead and get on it?
Nah. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna catch it on the back end. You all good?
All right, let's go. So this is leading up to the 1600s. Like I said, we just passed 1619, 1618. We talked about the gathering of white slaves in England in 1617. And then we dealt with the 1619 story with John Ross. So let's move to about the mid 1600s. All right, let's move up a little bit. This document became the blueprint for slave codes in 1688, enacted the control of of lives by forced laborers from Africa. This should surprise no one. For what was the 1661 Act other than a slave code in itself? Okay, so you know what was going on. By the mid 1600s, a high proportion of the working population in Barbados, Irish in the West Indies. Their conditions comes from the priests who traveled to the minister to minister to them. According to the Father John Grace, 12,000 Irish lived in Barbados and the surrounding islands. He also reported 600 slaves in the small island off St. Christopher. An official observer whose report and preserved in the state papers reported that in 1667, Barbados had no more than 670 proprietaries and effective men, of which a very great part Irish derived by the Negroes as white slaves. You understand that? So and let me read this again. It might have went over your head. So even Absorber says that it was white slaves, all even in the little islands, and that the very great part of Irish slaves derived by Negroes as white slaves. So they was brought by Negroes and it was white slaves. The same observer noted that on the plantation he had seen at any one time 30 to 40 English, Scotch, and Irish at work in the parching sun shoes, shoes, stocking, and Negroes at their trades in good condition. Negroes was at their trade in good condition. How long these so-called servants would have survived in such conditions is anyone's guess. It was really after they had got some control and gain in America, because you got to realize they started shipping, enslaving their people because they was in a dupe. They couldn't take care of the travel to go up into the interior of Africa. They didn't have the shit to go out to certain parts. They said, fuck, we just sell our people, make some money. And by the time they started making their money, they started the plan in the 1617 to sell their people to get out of the slump and get some money. By 1675, they were starting to feel sorry and think of ways to get the white slaves out of slavery. Okay. In 1665, a series of conspiracies and disturbances in Jamaica. Martial law was declared in the same year in Barbados. The major rebellion by Africans was planned across the large number of plantations. The plot was foiled, and 110 slaves were charged with conspiracy. The conspirators, the conspirators knew what awaited them if found guilty. 5 took their own lives before they were brought to trial. 52 slaves were executed in the most brutal fashion, 6 being burned alive, 11 beheaded. Okay? So that's what's going on in Barbados. So let's get to it. The Virginia, shit, my bad, y'all. The inner men, the equally work hard. Like I said, this is still white cargo. This is the book White Cargo. The inner man was equally well cared for, right? So what is it? What this getting the story of white slavery is talk about freedmen, Negroes, pretty much how the Negroes was pretty much indoctrinated, and they looked at them as long as they was proprietaries of Lutherans, Catharines, Quakers, Annabellas, Moravians, Brothers, Duncans, Presbyterians, Freemasons, Freethinkers, Jews, Mohammedans, right? That's what they call pagan Negroes or Indian. However, that ain't really what I wanted to talk about. I want to get into something else though. Hold on. All right, this is where I want to go with it. All right, so let's get it. Whites enslaved in America, right? Whites were slaves, were the first slaves in America, right? Let's get into it. The enslavement of whites extended throughout the American colonies, and the slave laborers was the crucial factor of the economic development in the colonies. Gradually, it developed into fixed systems, every bit as rigged and codified as Negro slavery was to become. In fact, Negro slavery was established by the colonial Americans because black slaves was governed, organized, and controlled by the structures and organizations that were first used to enslave and control whites. So what it said in America that we had a system here. We had a government here. We had government. We was organized. We had structures, and we was organized behind a lot of these things that was going on. The old buildings that you see in your old city county buildings, old masonry buildings. These are shit that your ancestors had. So let's get into it. They was organized, that they was first used to enslave and control whites. Black slaves were late corners fitted into the system already developed, right? So blacks came later on, and they said it just was a piece that it worked out. It was easy. We had niggas here, we could enslave them. Fuck it, let's get them in the system. White slavery was the historic base upon which Negro slavery was constructed. The important construction, labor ideologies, and social relations necessary for slavery already had been established. Within indentured servitude, white servants in many ways came remarkably close to the ideal type of chattel slavery, which later became associated with African experience. Okay, that's according to Hilary McD. Beckless, and that's White Servitude. That's page 6 and 7, and also page 71. The practice developed and tolerated in the kidnapping of whites. laid the foundation of the kidnapping of Negroes. The kidnapping of Negroes. Eric Williams, From Columbus to Castro. That's on page 103. Okay. Let's get into some more white slavery in just a second. All right, so hold on. So this is all dealing with white slaves in America. Uh, to use the word servant to describe a slave would have been very prevalent among the Bible uh, literate people like colonial Americans. In the English translation, the Bible arrived at the time from Wycliffe. I hope that's what it's saying. To the 1611 King James Version, the word slave, as it appeared in the original biblical languages, was translated as servant. For example, King James Version, Genesis 9:25, read, cursed by Canaan, and the servant of the servants shall he be. The intended meaning were is clearly that the slave, and there is a little doubt in the mind of the early Americans who served several servants in the synonymous with slaves. All right, Genesis 9:25 English version. So it's just saying this is going through different forms of slavery and what these terms and how it was used in historical time. The mainstream history books and films touch on white slavery. It is referred to with a deceptively mild-sounding title, indentured service. The implicate being that the enslavement of whites was not as terrible as the composing as Negro slavery, but constitute instead of more beings bond and yet servitude. So it just talks about how they simply went out their way to hide and deny. Now ask yourself who hid and denied that whites was slavery later on in the late 1600s. Oliver Cromwell. This was one of his main tasks, is to hide what was going on, what he was doing to the English whites and to the whites that they was bringing to England from America. So I'm gonna pretty much wrap it up right there, man. I'm pretty much done right there. I'm gonna let y'all keep rocking out, man. If you got something to build on, that's cool. If not, we can end it right there, and we'll get right into the part two, which is gonna get into a little more detail dealing with white slavery in particular states, in particular cities and counties, and how this kind of thing took a tip over the iceberg, you know. So, brother Truth, you want to say something before we get out of here? Your mic's still muted.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool,
I just want to hold on one second. I just want to show I just want to show them, you know, the lie about indentured servant, that it didn't last that long, and show an actual correspondent from an indentured servant in 1784 to show that, you know, a lot of times they try to make it seem like indentured servitude only stretch between like just mainly the 1600s, and this shit actually went on even after the fucking Revolutionary War. You feel me? So I just want to show this indentured servitude contract real quick, and just, you know, just to give a brief understanding that, you know, ain't no such thing as no Africans taking over the slave market that these niggas always been. Now this is an actual indentured contract. All right. Slide it over. And let's read. This indentured, when filed that James Brackett of Armana of I don't know what the fuck that is, do voluntary put himself servant to Enoch McKinney on the west of the ship Washington to serve said I can't read that, of his fulfilling for a dual of the full space time and contract, and notice that the amount of years was scratched out from the first day of arrival on the ship of Washington, Virginia, in the United States of North America, which time or term the said master of his salon shall and will find a supply the said James bracket with sufficient meat, drink, apparel, and lodge, and all other necessities benefits such a servant. And at the end, the expiration of the tenant term, they scratched out the years again. The said James bracket to be made free and receive according to the customs of the county. And witness therefore laid parties unto a shame. Okay, so let me back up out of that because that's kind of big. But that's an actual contract. And this is what it says. So he came from Amarga Island, Ireland, and he was sold to Enoch Stickney. And this is actually what a collection that is. Citation James Bracken, Indenture 1784, Ascension number 10398, Special Collection, University of Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia. And one more thing I want to show on this is the treatment.
What year was it?
That was 1784, after the revolution. So they were still enslaving motherfuckers and shit, bro. You feel me? So let's get to it. This is off the early Virginia Colony Encyclopedia. So this is an actual government website dealing with the historical evidence of the early Virginia colony in the state of Virginia. That's what website this is. Servants ran away largely because their lives in Virginia tended to be nasty, brutish, and short. Although they often worked alongside their masters in tobacco field, they usually lived apart and often under primitive conditions. They worked from dawn until dusk, 6 days a week during the growing season, which on tobacco and wheat farms could last from as early as February until late as November. The mortality rate was very high, most due to what Virginia called the summer season, a time during which disease killed the majority of new arrivals. According to Dutchman David Peterson de Vries, who visited Virginia in March 1633, immigrants died like cats and dogs, while the sick wanted to sleep all day, but they must be prevented from sleeping by force lest they die. In the meantime, servants were seasoned or unseasoned, were treated as property subject to overwork and beatings. For instance, in 1624, Alex Proctor, who Captain John Smith turned a proper and civil gentlewoman, arranged for her runaway maidservant Elizabeth Abbott to be beaten. The punishment was so severe that Abbott died. George Sandy, the colony treasurer, allowed his servants to starve, languish for lack of medical treatment, while in 1649 a mistress was charged with thrashing her maid servant more like a dog than a Christian, so that her head was as soft as a sponge in one place. So basically, she caved that motherfucking head in. You feel me? They weren't playing no games about. They didn't give a fuck if they was fucking from Europe or not. Nigga, they was cracking their motherfucking skulls. But let's see how they got from servitude to slavery. Servitude in Virginia tobacco fields approached closer to slavery than anything known at the time in England, the historian Edmund S. Morgan wrote. Men served longer, were subjected to more rigorous punishment, and were traded about as commodities, beginning in the 1620s. For much of the 17th century, the servants were white Englishmen and women with a smattering of Africans, Indian, and Irish, under indentured with the promise of freedom. By 1707 and the passage of an act of concerning servants and slaves, slavery had become a coin at all levels of Virginia society, as well on its way to complete replacing indentured service as the primary source of bond labor. Right now, this was another thing, right? Because we hear about the Bacon Rebellion and shit, right? Now, they say most historians have explained this shift by citing either social or economic shift in Virginia beginning around the 1670s. Morgan and others, for instance, argue that the Bacon Rebellion 1676-1677 was in part the result of discontent among former servants by harshening that discontent in the name of racial solidarity, pointing in the direction of African white elites could create a more stable workforce. Now, what that part at about that shit being the cornerstone of the Revolutionary War? That's what I was looking for. Boom, 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 boom. What the fuck that? Okay, I think that's on the next one. Right. Now, here's an actual documentation census of the tobacco plant. All right, this handwritten manuscript from 1729 gives an account of the number of tobacco plants being cultivated in the 2nd precinct of Accomack County. The list includes the name of planters as well as some slaves that worked the field. It is in the Library of Virginia Local Government Records. This is the actual motherfucking document. All right, in obedience to an order of Masonry concerning the date of the 26th of May, 1729, with the scriber has hundreds of tobacco plants and following, and this is all of his indentured servants. All of his indentured servants. So, you know, man, I'll leave it at that right there, bro. And we can just get into it on the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you touched out right there because what we're going to do is get into actual particular states and counties. We're going to get into slave manifestos, documents. That means when we get into these manifestos, we're going to be explaining name that was documented of slave. We're going to be given the name of a ship. We'll be given the name of shipmaster. We'll be given the name of shipper. And if we can, which is not always common in most cases, and we will be given the port that these slaves was arriving in as well. Okay. So just make sure y'all be in tune for the next one.
Real shit.
So with that being said, man, we're gonna end this bill right here. I appreciate everybody for tapping in. Peace, love, and light to all the American Aborigines. This was definitely a fire bill. Make sure y'all drop some fire emojis in the chat. Please drop fire emojis in the chat. Shout out to my brother Truth.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
your brother Aboriginal Power. Make sure y'all drop some fire emojis.
I can finally fucking smoke that, nigga.
Me too. I literally just lit my shit up. I know you heard my shit flicking over there. But
Yeah, I hit that bitch a little bit early and realized I got lost in the information and forgot where the fuck I was going to. Then I was like, man, let me put this shit out, man.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I ain't gonna lie to you.
You feel me? That's why I be like, when we spend like that, I try to be sober minded because it ain't that a nigga can't get it out. It's just like shit. I be fuck around, be reading up until what the fuck I want to get to instead of just getting to the fucking point and shit.
Right. Yeah, it'd be like it too, though, G. It'd be like it. It'd be like it. But I'm glad y'all enjoyed it, man. I really do. I appreciate y'all. Hey, with that being said, bro, you got something to say before we close out, big bro?
Nah, man. It's all good, man. You know, man, we can shut this one down. This shit, man. You feel me? Especially the sister Janice about to get ready to go in. So you feel
she about to get ready to go in. So y'all already know how we coming, man. Make sure y'all hit the like button. I really appreciate it if y'all was to hit the like button. Share this on all your social media outlets. Let me shout out the people who donate. Y'all already know how we coming, man. Make sure y'all hit the like button. I really appreciate it if y'all was to hit the like button. Share this on all your social media. Damn, I got a feedback. Hey, mic check.
I hear you, bro.
Hey, what the hell? Hey, let me shout out the Cash App family. Don't Do It sent the Cash App donation. Robert Jones sent the Cash App donation. W Max C sent the Cash App donation. Beam sent the Cash App donation. And Albo the guy sent the Cash App donation. I really appreciate that, you guys. I really do. I appreciate all the support.
Man, thank you, Robert Jones, for that Cash App donation too, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, we really do. We appreciate it, man. It takes a lot of time. And I'm glad you guys here with me, man, because y'all be here a lot of the times, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hour bills, and trying to soak up the information. So we try to give it to you in more digestible manners, and so it ain't so lengthy, so you can go back and catch the replay. So peace, love, and light to all American Aborigines, man. It's your brother Aboriginal Power. I appreciate all the support. Another thing is, man, like I said, this is part one. This is the introduction. Somebody's asking for your cash app out there also, brother Truth.
You said what, brother?
Somebody's asking for your cash app.
Damn.
Drop it in the chat for them before we get out of here. Hey, before we get out of here, we're gonna play a little jammy jam. Let's go. Y'all know where we coming.
We gonna die every day. They say Jesus gonna save us. Well, I know we die every way. I know we die every day. They tell us we black, but we ain't. I'm a original native. Yeah, we gonna die every day. Cause we don't know we can't. We been here, live here, open borders, got the border off rights. Kidnapped, bitched out, blacked out, covered up, washed white, drugged up, slugged up, beat bread, left for dead, fuck your life. It's all the plan, kill your man, take your land, slave your kids, rape your wife. Why y'all look so mad if all this shit I say is true? Why y'all look so mad if all this shit happened to you? White man quick to tell you was a slave nothing before. But he himself only been free since 1840. Young recording, I'm an ancient Egyptian from Atlantis, head straight for Canada, that's Israel. Nothing fake about me, no capping rapping. I just spent the ink and I'm digital. No caveman, I'm original. Kentucky fried, extra crispy. Wear a lot of gold, cause my family history. I'm the guy to know, I bring death to history. But we gon' die every day. They say Jesus gonna save us. Well, I know we die every way. I know we die every.
Hey, make sure y'all go over there and check out the sister Janice, man. She going live. Go check out the sister Janice. I'll meet y'all over there. Peace, love, and light, man. We out of here. Stay aware, stay wild, stay vigilant, stay vigilant.